Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cattle Show. Today we're in California. We're going to be spending a little bit of time on a dairy operation here, and our goal today is really to link together a couple of different things. We've had a chance to go through and introduce some different nutrition topics in the last show, and I think the big goal with this one is to introduce the fact that nutrition is only one part of the equation. A lot of what happens on a dairy farm is really related to the way that the cattle are handled, the environment that they're in, and many other factors that have a tremendous impact on the productivity of the animals and the profitability of the farm. To start with, today we're going to be joining Abraham. Abraham is our dairy focused consultant here in California and works with this operation. So very glad to have a chance to come and visit with you today a little bit.
Thank you very much, Mike.
With Cargill Animal Nutrition, one of the things that we do want to look very closely at is management and clearly look at the opportunities on a dairy. And today what we want to do is to really focus in on one specific dairy. It's some of the things that we've done as we've worked with this operation with Cargill Animal Nutrition over the last couple of years. And maybe to start with, Abraham, you could give us a little history on the dairy operation.
This is a 4,500 cow dairy located in Tulare County of California. Currently, the cows are housed in 2-row freestall barns. It's an excellent facility, very good cooling, fans above the feed alley, 2-inch soaker lines. Cows are milked in a double 60 parallel parlor. I was first introduced to the dairy approximately 2 years ago. At that time when I came into the dairy, things were not going very well at the dairy. Production was in the mid 50-pound range. There were a lot of transition cow problems specifically. All in all, it was not a very pretty situation we were facing here.
We've kind of gone through some of the history now. Maybe you can give us a little idea of how things are going today on the farm.
Production on the dairy is almost 9,000 pounds on a rolling herd average basis, higher than what it was 2 years ago. I think some of the major improvements we've seen is in the transition cow area. We have very little metabolic problems at the dairy. Reproduction has improved fantastically. Because reproduction has shown such a great improvement, cows are not milking these long lactations anymore. And days in milk has decreased from that 240-day level to approximately 170 days in milk where the dairy currently is at. I think the owners of the dairy are very, very satisfied with how things currently are, and I could not be more excited about where we are at this moment too.
That's great. That's certainly where we would like the dairy producer to be, is very happy with the operation. Maybe you can give us a little bit more idea of the facility that we're in right now.
This is the transition cow facility that we have here. Previously, the dairy had a very crowded transition area. Space-wise, it was totally inadequate. Heifers and cows were mixed into the same group and were being fed the same close-up diet. One of the things we wanted to change on the dairy was we wanted to split those two groups of animals apart, not only for the sake of competition between smaller and larger animals, but also that we could feed different diets to those two groups of animals. And a lot of dairy producers neglect cooling in transition cows, especially on close-up and dry animals. And here in Central California, last year, for instance, we had 54 days over 100 continuously, and we focused heavily on making sure that we could cool these cows down to try and keep the dry matter intakes up as much as possible. And with the employment of fans and also a 2-inch soaker line above the feed alley here, we have a couple of close-up pens here. A further off close-up pen where animals would spend approximately from 21 to 7 days pre-calving, and then the area over here, the close-up pen area, if I can put it that way, where they spend the last 7 days pre-calving. We decided that we also want to make sure we cool the cows in the far pen. That's an open dry lot there, and so we use shade netting over the feed line and the feed alley there, and also extended the soaker line so that these cows can get water on them as well when it's very hot, and that's worked very well for us over there. I think we're doing an adequate job at cooling these cows and keeping intakes up, and just not crowding cows into the close-up facility here has definitely given us fantastic results. Previously, the owners here had lots of problems with clinical milk fever on their animals, and we've taken the approach of trying to take as much potassium out of the close-up diet as possible. We go around and try and find forages that are very low in potassium, like decayed hay that we currently have here, and on a weekly basis we also do urine pHs on the close-up cows here, which I think is a great practice. Our incidence rate of metabolic problems, including DAs, clinical milk fever, has completely disappeared. We run at less than 0.5% displaced abomasum incidence rate. On a dairy where on average we have over 500 animals freshening per month, which I think is phenomenal for this dairy.
It sounds like the transition area was certainly one of the key things that you focused in on 2 years ago, when there were opportunities that were obviously there to improve profitability and production of the cattle.
Absolutely, Mike. We previously had fresh animals that would lose excessive amounts of body weight because these animals just weren't feeling very good and they weren't eating. And now we have animals that are coming in full of milk and they're not losing that body weight they used to, and this translates into better peak milk, number one, and number two, reproductively. We know an animal that loses 1 full point of body score is going to be very hard to get bred back fast. Our reproductive pregnancy rates have improved tremendously on those fresher animals. I think if you look at the production where the dairy is today, when you're at 170 days in milk versus 240 days in milk, that really to me is where the big difference lies. And it all comes back to making sure that our cows transition properly.
No matter what we do, if we have problems in the transition area, it's going to be very difficult to get the cows to produce as we would expect them to during lactation.
When you take a look at the close-up cows currently here in the close-up pen and even the close-up heifers, I can notice from 2 years ago that the animals have significantly less body weight or less body condition on them than what they used to have. Well, there are two reasons for that. One, previously, because these animals had such long lactations because of reproductive failure, they just tended to get heavier and heavier as time went by. And a fat animal in the close-up pen is an animal that also will have a lesser appetite than an animal that has less body score, and I think that led to a lot of problems. Well, by fixing the reproductive problems we've had and the transition problems, we're now getting animals coming back here that are in that 325 to 35 body score. You see very few animals that are over-conditioned in this close-up area, and that's helped us tremendously. And then secondly, the push out from the milk cow pens every day was taken to the dry cows. And there were enormous amounts of push out every day here because there was no weighbacks were done the next day on whatever the push out was. And some days there might have been 80 to 100,000 pounds of push out that was fed to the dry cows because this feed has a lot of value still. Well, in this situation it was fed to dry animals, and the energy value on the milk cow feed is so high that it also led to these over-conditioned animals. Well, that was a very bad practice and probably one of the first practices we stopped here when we started working on this dairy.
As we've talked about, there is a split between the heifers and the mature cows as they come in. Are there differences in not only the splitting of the animals, but are there differences in the diets as well?
I think splitting of the animals out of a factor of competition really helped, not having the heifers in of the cows. Because the heifers will always be the animal that will be the last one to get a chance to eat or a time to drink some water. I think the nutrient needs or requirements of a close-up heifer is very different from a close-up cow.
The transition period, we define that as the 3 weeks prior to calving and the 3 weeks after calving. The ones prior to calving are the close-up cows, the ones after calving are the fresh cows. It's just a very critical point in time for the cow. Dry matter intake drops. It's just a very natural phenomenon that the animal doesn't eat as much going into freshening. We want to minimize that drop as much as possible. Abraham, can you explain to us and talk just a little bit more about some of the changes that they've made in the feeding area?
Previously we had 3 horizontal mixer wagons that had a 15,000 pound capacity. It was very hard to get the cows fed in one day for a variety of reasons. Number one, the amount of animals we have here, the feeders were working very long hours. They were very demotivated. We weren't getting very good mixing of the ingredients itself. The hay wasn't getting cut up properly. Now that we have 2 vertical mixer wagons, they have a capacity of 32,000 pounds each. We can get the cows fed a lot faster every day. The consistency of the mix is tremendously better. There isn't much opportunity for the cows to sort the diet that's ending up in front of them. I think the computerized feeding program that we have in here too, we have an ability to now keep the feeders accountable. Once a month we sit down with them and evaluate their performance. We're able to track the kind of feeding errors that they make and see exactly what they do, and it has been very good since we've installed that, and we're very happy with that.
As we've looked at some of the equipment and some of the other things, one of the changes that was obviously very important here was doing a better job of accurately mixing and then accurately getting things fed, understanding dry matter intakes and all of those different aspects. The feeding management system was a very critical piece of that. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit more on how you use that system to help manage some of the different aspects of feeding the cows.
One of the things that you'll notice at the dairy is how clearly pens are identified at this dairy. And we have over 60 different pens here and 5 different feeders, and I think it's essential in a situation like this that the pens are identified correctly, because the computerized feeding system will tell the feeder what quantity of feed to go and drop at which pen, and if these pens aren't identified very properly, we could have a big mess on our hands here. One of the big advantages or benefits of having a computerized feeding system, we now make the decision of when cows need to be fed and what quantities. There are no confusion for the feeders anymore. He follows the instructions. When we want 20,000 pounds of feed to go to pen 1 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's what's going to happen. And if he deviates from that, I will know by tomorrow that he hasn't been following the instructions as we want the cows to be fed. I also think one of the big drawbacks of this dairy previously has been the fact that we could not track dry matter intake. Cows were overfed one day, underfed the next day. Now we have a very consistent quantity of feed going to the pens every single day. We can adjust it up or down based on what the push out and the refusal rate is the next morning. Previously, dry matter of forages like the haylage, the silage, corn silage and wheat silage was only done basically on a monthly basis. Now we do it much more often, if not every day, at least 2 to 3 times a week. The moment we adjust it on the computer in the main office, it automatically adjusts the loads that are being fed to the cows. So our reaction time is a lot faster. Overall, I think the owners of this dairy, they do not see how they can ever go back to the way they used to feed cows with feed sheets and leave a lot of those critical decisions on how to feed the cows and what quantities of feed had to be put in front of them up to the feeders here. So Mike, one of our goals of the TMR here is not to have any piece of forage in here longer than 4 to 6 inches. And with the kind of equipment we have here, we're achieving that. And the big advantage that gives us is it's basically almost impossible for these cows to sort the grain away from the forage. And so at any given bite that the cow takes, I think she's getting a balanced diet with the right quantity of fiber and effective fiber in it. And I think that's benefited this dairy enormously in terms of the milk production that we're seeing out of the cows and the cows staying on feed here.
So we're getting a very consistent mix every day, same length. The other thing that's helping too is making the adjustments on moisture, and if things do need to be changed, we can add water to the diet to make sure that the moisture content of the diet stays very constant. And that way we do reduce that separation and make a very constant diet day in and day out for the cows.
And Mike, I'm confident that what lands in front of the cows is very close to what I formulated for, because I have the ability to go back and check on that every day.
As we get into the fresh cows, it's very important to get a good nutrition program set up for them and to reduce as much stress as possible during the entire transition period. Maybe you can tell us just a little bit about what they've done to change the management within the fresh cow area and maybe some of the things that they're doing right now.
Previously, the fresh pen was a 400 cow pen that had fresh heifers and cows mixed into the same pen and approximately 400 animals in the pen. It was a very difficult task for anybody monitoring these fresh animals to try and find a cow that's sick, just because of the sheer numbers of animals that was in there. We moved the fresh heifer and cow pen to a different location on the dairy where they were in close proximity to the parlor to cut down on the walking time that these fresh animals had to do every day. And then the fresh cow monitoring program that we spent a lot of time on. Basically what that entails was every fresh animal, the day that she freshens, gets marked on her back. After that, every morning that the fresh animals get locked up, every cow that's between 2 and 9 days fresh gets a temperature taken on. And if the animal doesn't show an elevated temperature, a green stripe or mark gets made on her. If she does have an elevated temperature, a red mark gets made on that animal. Based then whether she has an elevated temperature or not, a different decision gets made on how to handle that animal. Obviously animals with an elevated temperature that do not eat and that seem to be sick, those are animals that most probably would be treated with antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs. Animals that do not have an elevated temperature but that do look off and look sick, a different treatment protocol would be followed for them, and they probably have metabolic disease, something like ketosis or hypocalcemia. In general, the decrease in body score on our fresh animals the first 60 days postpartum has decreased enormously, and I think that has helped our breeding at the dairy.
You had mentioned that one of the things you felt was very beneficial in helping make improvements in the herd was the improvement in breeding that did take place. Obviously, there was some effect of that from improving the transition cow area and some things like that. Could you maybe give us a little bit more detail on how they're managing the breeding program?
We looked at the reproductive records, and one of the things that we noticed there, not only was heat detection numbers relatively low, on an average, heat detection numbers for a couple of years ago were in the low 40% range. Pregnancy rates were also very low. They were in the low single-digit numbers. Heat detection times conception rate will give you a pregnancy rate. When we looked at conception rate here, that was also nothing to write home about. So you could almost say every single part of reproduction at the dairy was broken. We set goals here that we were going to try and improve our heat detection numbers well in excess of 60%. We want to try and get our pregnancy rate number closer to 20% was our goal. I think if you can reach 20% pregnancy rate here in California, you are probably within the top 5% of herds in terms of your reproductive performance. With all the changes we employed here in our transition, cows started showing better and stronger heats. Our reproduction has improved tremendously. In the last 3 months, we have our pregnancy rate around 17% now, which is the highest it's ever been. So we're getting a lot closer to our goal. We evaluated the breeder performance in terms of service of conception. The owners felt that the breeders at that time was part of the problem here, and they were replaced with different breeders, outside breeders, who had a proven track record. More than anything else, I think that's helped the production of this dairy enormously. One of the other changes at the dairy too is timed AI. The dairy never used the off-sync program with timed AI. We are now employing timed AI at least for the past year and a half in conjunction with the local veterinarians that do work at the dairy. And any animal that hasn't shown a heat by 80 days in milk here goes on to a timed AI program, and it has been very successful at this dairy as well. So I think a combination of all those things have been what has led to our reproductive success or improvement that we've seen here.
At Cargill Animal Nutrition, I think it's very important to realize that what we're looking at is really a lot more than just the basics. Whenever we get into an operation, we find that there are a lot of different things that can have an impact on the profitability, the productivity, the health of that operation. And I think it's very critical to look at all of those different items. We've spent some time in the past talking about nutrition and how important that is in the things that we do. And really, today what we've focused in on are the other things that impact the operation, really things that fall into the production management area. And there can be many different items that fall there. Things like cow comfort. We had an example today of a farm that really did have a lot of things going for it in the cow comfort area. The producer had done an excellent job putting in fans and making sure that the environment was comfortable for them. But in this situation, we still had cattle that were not performing as expected. Once again, there were other things that go into that. So as we've talked about today, things like the transition cow area are very critical. We need to make sure that we have comfortable cows there and that the nutrition program fits. We need to look at other things. Water quality is certainly one. Animal environment, the way that things are really set up and managed from the way that cattle move. The breeding systems, all of these things have an impact on the production of the cows. The other important factors are that dairies are located in many different regions of the country as well. And with that, that creates different requirements. In this case, a little bit warmer region, we have to be very, very careful about the way that things are managed from a heat standpoint, heat stress, having fans available and sprinklers available to make sure that we can cool the cattle. In other environments, maybe that's not quite as critical. But no matter what that is, the critical point is that every operation is different and we need to handle each operation in a different way. Nutrition is certainly a very important part of what we do on a dairy. And really the beginning of that is high quality ingredients. We need to make sure that we have good quality forage that's available for the cows. It needs to be fresh, it needs to be free from heating. It needs to basically taste good to the animals. If we have that and we mix that with other good ingredients and products that can be delivered, at that point then we have a diet that at least tastes good to the animals. Above and beyond that, some of the other factors we look at are timing of the feeding, making sure that there's feed available when the cattle return from the milking parlor. And another important aspect is making sure that when we're feeding a TMR that we do a good job of pushing up to ensure that the cattle can reach the feed. Our whole goal is to make sure that it's very easy for the cow to eat anything she wants, when she wants, and that it tastes good to her and she can maximize that amount of feed that she's going to take in. As we're looking at the cows, one of the things that we do look for as we conduct a walkthrough is to make sure that the cattle are ruminating or chewing their cud as we would expect them to. If we have a well-balanced diet and the cattle are relaxed, and quite often this is happening when they're laying down or relaxed in the stalls, they're going to spend some time ruminating or bringing that fiber back up and re-chewing it. At that point, basically, it's a way for them to continue to break down the longer fiber particles and continue the digestion process. What we would usually expect in relaxed animals that have had a chance to get back and eat and then lay down is that 60 to 70% of those animals should be chewing their cud. If we see less than that, we're going to start looking at diets to make sure that they're not too fine, or that we have some acidosis going on in the cows, and that we don't have comfortable cows with a very healthy digestive system. As you can see from the dairy that we've looked at today, when we start getting into a large operation, it becomes very complex. And it's very important to realize that there are many different team members that go into making this a successful operation. Obviously, the management, the ownership on the farm, they're the ones that need to make all those final decisions and really set the goals and the direction for the operation. We need to work very closely with them to understand those goals very clearly. But there are many other partners that we work with on the dairy as well, the veterinary staff and other people that are coming onto the dairy to work with that operation. Some of the key things that we do look at from an animal health standpoint are things that are related to mobility. There are different scoring systems that we can use to actually understand how well the cattle are walking and the health of the feet. And that becomes a very critical component as well. We've talked a little bit about maximizing dry matter intake. And anytime that a cow has a sore foot, we're going to probably start to limit dry matter intake. She's not going to feel like getting up, getting onto those feet, getting to the bunk and eating whenever she should. So we do start getting into a situation where we limit intake because of those sore feet. With any dairy operation, one of the challenges becomes where do we start putting animals and how do we handle the movement of those animals. A couple of critical items to think about there. First of all, we talked about the fresh cows being located very close to the milking area to try to limit the stress on those animals. It's a very short walk for them to actually get to the milking parlor. We may want to consider actually keeping the higher producing cows a little bit closer to the milking parlor if we can as well. So locating high cow pens very close, maybe putting some of the further off animals, the lower production animals, a little bit further away. Increasing the productivity of those animals is going to increase our milk revenue. When we look at revenue, really revenue is composed of two different parts. One is saving cost, or the actual cost side, but the other side is really generating more income. And I think a key element to look at there is that there are many ways to generate income on a dairy farm. Milk production is obviously the big one. The other one, from a revenue standpoint, is to reduce some costs. And areas like that are making sure that we do a good job of controlling inventory, shrink loss within the commodity areas. Once again, we may have to spend just a little bit to make that increase, but in the end, we want to maximize the revenue that we generate. One of the tools that we use with Cargill Animal Nutrition when we do start looking at the production management area is something that we call the Cow Care and Comfort Scorecard. It's really a way that we can go through and audit a dairy operation to try to look for opportunity areas that relate to everything from animal health to cow comfort to water quality to feed quality, feed management, all of these critical areas that we've seen and talked about today. And that really becomes a very important part of what we do. We want to be able to identify what the next opportunity area is to attack on the operation. So by using an audit tool like this, it helps us to sit down and really identify areas where we're doing an excellent job, other areas where we can make improvement, and then go through and prioritize those areas so we make sure that we're going after the ones that can generate the most return. One of the key elements that we've seen with this, we've used this tool many different times to go through and assess the production management of an operation, and found that there's a very high correlation to the score that we can get with that scorecard and the actual production level on the farm. As we've pulled numbers together, we found a very high correlation between the score of this and productivity, as high as a 0.85 correlation. Now that's outside of any nutrition work at all, so it just goes to show how important the actual management, comfort, environment, all these different factors, how important they are to the overall productivity of the animal. One other element when we start talking about production management that we really haven't spent much time on yet today is really the area of biosecurity also. Whenever we talk about a healthy, productive animal, it's very important to decrease any disease pressure that we have on those animals. And biosecurity is really a way that we need to look at reducing that. So it's very important that we do look at the way animals are brought into an operation, that we have healthy animals coming in, that we don't allow things to transmit from one group of animals to another. So we do things like separating the calves from the cows very quickly to make sure that we're not passing on adult diseases to those young calves. At Cargill Animal Nutrition, it's very critical for us to really be successful in what we do with the dairy operation. That's how we add value, and that's really what it's all about when we go out and work with an operator. That can fall into many different areas. It can be success in the nutrition program, but many times the nutrition program is not the only thing that we need to look at. It becomes very critical for us to look at the whole production management area and make sure that we're working through other problems that could derail a good, solid nutrition program on that farm. Really, I think success boils down to being able to find those things that are occurring on the farm, address those, understand the goals of the producer so that we have a clear understanding of the direction we're going, and get those fixed and see a response and a result. I guess, Abraham, give you a chance maybe to talk just a little bit about how you view success when you're working with an operation as well.
Well, Mike, at this operation, it's been a tremendous amount of fun when you identify certain bottlenecks and you do make changes to those bottlenecks or problems occurring, and you do see results out of that. And I think at every specific operation that I work on, we set some goals and we reach those goals, and that's very satisfying when you can do that. However, at the same time, we do recognize here that there's constant change at a dairy, change to the forages, change to the environmental conditions here. A lot of things can happen, and I don't think at any time we should sit back on our laurels and think we've reached the pinnacle here. It's all about continuous improvement. We've already sat down and discussed in the next 3 to 6 months what are potential threats for us at this dairy. You know, we could have a very hot summer, we could have a very poor growing season. A lot of things could happen here in the future, so we really have to be on top of our game here to try and sustain the success we've had here so far. So it's very nice to have success, but I think you could be knocked off your pedestal very easily. And so we have to be very vigilant here in the future too.
So what you're saying is many times you can look at success as being culmination of reaching one of those goals, but quite often once you do that, then there are new goals that are set up ahead that we need to look at.
Absolutely, Mike.
Thank you, Abraham, for joining us here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through all the different parts of this operation and looking at some of the things that you have done to help create some success on this dairy.
My pleasure, Mike.
And we'd like to thank you for joining us as we've gone through the production management area, and thank you for joining us on The Cattle Show.
If you have additional questions related to your dairy's needs, contact a Cargill Animal Nutrition Consultant or look them up on the web. If you have a product or service that you'd like to see featured on a future program, or if you have questions or comments, please contact us.